Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Last Week on the Internet. I'm your host, Kola Lane. Now, as of recording this video, it was over a week ago now that Donald Trump gave his speech at the National Religious Broadcasters Convention in Nashville, Tennessee. And I bring that up because the original premiere episode of this show was going to be me sitting down and talking about a particular subject that kept popping up when people talked about the entire event: Christian nationalism. However, in doing research for that video, I've come to realize that Christian nationalism is such a poorly documented subject. I'm pretty sure there's more documentation on illegal immigrants than there is on Christian nationalism. And so while I struggle to find facts and information and historical data on that subject, I thought I would premiere the show on a more lighthearted note and give you guys a history of the very thing this show is all about: the internet. So buckle up, because we're about to uncover a history not even your browser's incognito mode can hide. Let's get into it. So everything has a beginning, and the internet is no different. Our story begins in the late 1960s during the Cold War. The United States and Russia had both unlocked nuclear weaponry, and the US decided that it needed a communication system that would not be affected by a nuclear attack. So in 1962, a man by the name of Dr. Joseph Karl Robert Licklider, also known simply as Lick, came up with the concept of global networking in some memos discussing an intergalactic computer network. That sounds like something straight out of Star Trek. A year later, while he was serving as the director at the United States Department of Defense Advanced Research Project Agency, or IPA, Lick brought up the challenges that would arise when trying to establish a time-sharing network of computers, which would eventually lead to the creation of the IPANet. So in 1966, a man named Bob Taylor initiated development on the IPANet project with the goal to enable resource sharing between remote computers. So being able to send that funny cat meme from a computer in Texas to a computer in Washington, or important government information. Take your pick. Now, Taylor appointed a man named Larry Roberts as the project manager. An important feature in this network of communication was a concept called packet switching. Packet switching is transferring small pieces of data, or packets, across various networks, rather than sending the entire chunk of information in one piece. This made it faster and more efficient for data to be transferred. Now, Larry Roberts asked Leonard Kleinrock at UCLA to develop mathematical methods for analyzing the packet network technology. In 1968, Lick, that guy from the very beginning, in case you forgot, wrote a paper called The Computer as a Communication Device, which illustrated his vision of network applications and predicted the use of computer networks for communications. This is an especially intriguing idea because up until that point, computers had generally been considered as simply just mathematical devices used for speeding up computations. In 1969, the first computers were connected and the Network Control Protocol was implemented in 1970, which was developed by UCLA graduates. The Network Control Protocol was a communication protocol for a computer network in the 1970s and 1980s. It was basically a system of rules that allows two or more entities of a communication system to transmit information. And if I go any further in depth than that, I would probably spontaneously combust. In 1971, the IPANet was officially declared operational. By 1973, traffic for the network began to grow once email was established at the majority of sites. Now, email plays a very big part in the growth of the internet. As IPANet grew quickly, people began to realize the potential of being able to send messages between different computers. So an American computer programmer by the name of Ray Tomlinson introduced the very first version of email, where the idea that the destination of a message should be indicated using the @ symbol. Before he came up with this idea, the @ symbol was used to distinguish between a person's name and the name of their computer. Because computer communication was growing so popular and cheaper to produce, LANs, or local access networks, were introduced as networks that local computers could connect to. However, because of the exponential growth of communication, it became difficult to keep track of all the different IP addresses. This was solved by the invention of the Domain Name System, or DNS, in 1983. It's basically the internet equivalent of a phone book, and all it did was convert hard-to-remember IP addresses into simple names. What's funnier is that one of the first big mailing lists to use this was called SF Lovers, which was a mailing list for science fiction lovers. By this point, the home computer industry had begun to grow rather quickly. In 1983, a new communications protocol was created called Transfer Control Protocol / Internetwork Protocol, or TCP/IP. This allowed computers on different networks to communicate with each other, because before then, all computers had to be connected to one of the four main host servers. Now, from 1986 to 1987, the popularity of email exploded on the internet. Within that 1 year alone, the number of hosts went from an incredible 2,000 to an astounding 30,000. Despite this overwhelming popularity and growth, the everyday consumer still needed advanced technology of computer in order to plug into the system and use it properly. This is where a man named Tim Berners-Lee comes in. In 1989, he proposed to his employer CERN, which was a particle research laboratory in Geneva, Switzerland, a new way of structuring and linking all the available information on a computer network that made it quick and easy to access. His concept of a web of information would ultimately become the World Wide Web. He designed HTTP, HTML, and URL links. Not only that, but he also created a piece of software that could present the HTML documents in an easy-to-read format, or a browser, which he called the World Wide Web. The way that it would work is that on an HTML page, which was just a page to store information, you would have hyperlinks. Those hyperlinks would then take you to other HTML pages, which would have more and more information. In 1991, the very first website, info.cern.ch, goes live. In fact, you can still visit that website, and it'll give you 4 hyperlinks, which you can take to other links that talk about the first website, the laboratory CERN, and even a simulator of what the first website looked like all the way back in 1991. It's actually really cool. In 1993, a student in Illinois launched a new browser called Mosaic. At this time, there were only about 130 web browsers to choose from. Mosaic was easy to download and install and worked on a vast amount of different computers. Not only that, but it was the first web browser to display images next to text, rather than having them open in a different window. Because of its simplicity, Mosaic opened up access to the internet to a whole new audience and caused a ripple effect on the internet, making the number of websites in 1993 go from 130 to more than 100,000 at the start of 1996. An important event to note is that both Amazon and eBay launched in 1995, with the very first item ever being auctioned off on eBay being a broken laser pointer for $14.83. From 1998 to 2000, there was a massive boom in new technology regarding the internet. Basically, as with anything new, companies saw the hype of the internet and tried to capitalize on it as much as possible, believing that it would be the center of economic growth. Little did they know. This led to an exorbitant amount of investment and unrealistic expectations about the rate of returns in regards to the internet. Now, with it being called the dot-com bubble, I'm sure you can see where this ends up. Venture capitalists sprung into action, trying to capitalize on the internet, and many companies were founded on speculative business plans. The most famous of these was Boo.com, which was a high-fashion online retailer who burnt their way through $200 million, or $365 million today, to get their website live on the internet, only to have the entire operation crash and burn within 6 months. It's important to note that without the internet, many of the things that internet users today take for granted would not exist. Because of the large amounts of information that was being shared on the internet, technology also had to improve. For instance, floppy disks, which was the standard for storing information up until the early 2000s, was replaced with hard drives, which could store gigabytes of information as compared to megabytes. Ethernet also improved their common speeds of kilobits per second to tens of megabits per second, and eventually to gigabits per second. And with all this improvement, people saw the potential for new means of communication, with websites like MySpace, Friendster, and LinkedIn all launching in 2003. And of course, in 2004, Facebook launched, quickly becoming the dominant social networking platform created by a man who may or may not be a lizard. A year later, the biggest video sharing platform, and the thing you're watching this on, YouTube, was launched. In 2006, a beta version of Google Docs was released, which employed the use of a cloud network. Now, cloud working was not a new invention. The idea for it stems all the way back to the 1960s, where it was initially popularized for remote job entry or sharing information while not being able to be at work. In 2007, the internet officially moved to mobile devices with the introduction of the iPhone. Now, there had been phones before this that had access to the internet, like the Nokia 9000 communicator. However, the cost of data to have access to the internet was just not worth it. Not only that, but the iPhone was the first device to offer a full experience of the internet, and not just a watered-down version as seen on previous phones. In 2010, Instagram launched, which started the trend of photo-focused social media platforms. As of today, there are over 5 billion internet users, or about 65% of the world, which means that just over 35% of the world still do not have access to the internet, even though it's been around for 50 years. Which is where companies like SpaceX's Starlink come in. Although the company was founded in 2015, it didn't start launching test satellites until 2018, and then 60 fully operational satellites in 2018. What these satellites do is provide low-cost internet to remote locations. Starlink hopes to eventually have over 24,000 satellites up and operational. But with all good things, there also comes bad things. Cybersecurity and online privacy have become an increased concern within the last decade, with scams, hackers, and viruses running rampant. In fact, the very first computer virus was created in 1971 by a computer programmer named Bob Thomas. Now, this virus was not malicious. It was merely a test to highlight the areas of vulnerability and security flaws in network communication. In the early 2000s, phishing scams became a popular way to steal people's information. The way that it would work is that scammers would send an email to an unsuspecting victim that looked like it came from an official business, asking them to click on a link and give them their personal information, which they would then steal. One of the most popular scams, which is still alive today, is called the 419 scam, or the Nigerian Prince scam. This scam is a version of the phishing scam we just talked about, where swindlers would reach out to potential victims and promise a large sum of money in return for some help. The name 419 scam comes from Section 419 of the Nigerian Criminal Code, which deals with swindling. However, this scam has existed in another form long before the internet was even conceived, dating back to the 19th century. According to history, a con artist who was allegedly a war prisoner in Spain would send a letter to a potential victim asking for help to achieve that prisoner's vast riches hidden in their home country. In return for their help, the prisoner would offer a share of their wealth to the victim if they agreed to send money for bail to the prison guards. This scam evolved over time to include French and Russian prisoners, and swindlers would become even more wild and creative with their stories. And it's things like that that make the internet one of the best and worst things to ever exist. But at the end of the day, it's the subject for this show. Things that happen on the internet, usually within the last week or so. Anyways, thank you for watching the premiere episode of Last Week on the Internet. I'm your host, Kola Lane, and I will see you on another Thursday.